Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Micronation by Rhombus Tix / TC Ricks, Chapter 3, Memesync. My real name is Chester Arthurson. He calls me Watson as an honorific like Caesar. I don't even know if he remembers my name anymore. Darla came into the room with a rather thick manila folder. I think I've got something, she smiled. So what's the damage this time? I asked. There's a department store where people have started to act really weird, Darla said. Define weird. Weird as in trying to mate with walls? Prow frowned. He was obviously not happy with their experience with the robot. Darla said, They have begun to act like people on television. Any kind of show you can think of, they've begun to imitate it. Show me the file, Prow said, somewhat intrigued. Darla obliged and handed it to him. I waited with amusement for Darla to fall asleep like she always did, while Prow did something boring, only she didn't this time. Taking speed or something, I asked. She looked at me with annoyance. I don't believe in medication. I had surgery recently. Surgery? What for? Didn't you know? She said incredulously. Didn't I know what? I asked. I'm narcoleptic. At least I was narcoleptic until just recently. It's a highly experimental treatment, but I got to the head of the list. She sounded a little guilty. You mean I've known you for a full year now, and you haven't said anything? I scratched my head in confusion. Well, first, I didn't see how it should be your business anyway, and second, I think it should have been obvious. She flicked invisible dust with her finger. I do, Prow said, sticking his head out from the folder. And I will take the case. It wasn't obvious to me. Many things aren't, Watson, but I still like you anyway. I will take this... Many things aren't, Watson, but I still like you anyway. I will take this case. Come, the game is afoot. And with that, we were out the door and to the hangar of Prow's plane. Again. Scene. Hack's department store was run by a disaffected ex-VP with something to prove. He had left the main chain store, Have Mart, and decided to do things his own way. The store was filled to the brim with programmable display cases that obviously cost tens of thousands of dollars. It was incredibly clean. This was doubly impressive by the fact that we had met the owner, Hack, a few minutes after the store had closed. Clean place, I said. We have over a dozen people on janitorial staff each shift. Hack straightened his tie and smiled. He did a quick visual inventory of his domain and smiled wider. How many does a normal department store have? I asked. Usually just one, he admitted. That must run up quite a bill. How do you make any money? Hack's was originally just a prototype. I never really expected to make money with this one. It was just supposed to serve as a template for later cheaper stores. Now, though, we've been making money hand over fist. Under normal circumstances, that would not be a problem, but as it stands... Yes, I've seen the file. Very interesting, Prow said. However, did you collect that much data in the first place? Hack sighed. You'd be amazed at how much even a regular store collects from the security footage and other sensors located around the store. Hack's is a step up even from that. To be honest, you are not the first people we called. Aside from mere academic curiosity, none of them seemed to find our customers' behavior to be a problem. Half of them didn't even believe us. They thought it was some kind of elaborate publicity stunt. Darla said, Most people wouldn't call a lot of people buying stuff at your store a problem. They call the way they're behaving good. For a moment, Hack wavered, as if not convinced by these arguments himself, but he shook his head and said, Look, one of the reasons I left Half-Mart is because I understand that the real health of the industry depends on the long-term relationship that we have with our customers. The quick fix is going to boost next year's profits, but often at the expense of long-term gain. And, Prow said, Hack shrugged. Prow pondered and finally nodded. Yes, you have a point there. I suppose the first thing we should do is examine your store, and very heavily, and search for clues. Clues? I asked. Yes, clues. Perhaps I should start for looking with the kitchen knife or the socket wrench? I turned and looked at Hack. Do you have a billiard room? Prow smiled at me, perfectly serious. That's the spirit, as if he had no idea I was mocking him. He took out an old-style magnifying glass and began wandering towards the jewelry section. Perhaps he in turn was mocking me. I rather doubt it. So I began to look around the store for clues. It's funny, but I'd never had a kleptomaniac kleptomaniac impulse in my life, yet there was something strange about wandering around in a store after dark that almost made me want to reach out and snarl something. I saw Darla asleep on one of the shelves in the furniture section. Apparently, the surgery hadn't been that effective. A tiny voice in the back of my head said that she might have just been tired, and now was not a normal time to sleep. I ignored that voice. So I wandered around looking for clues, but amazingly enough, didn't find any matchbooks that said Evil Mind Controller's Hotel Room 405 or a slip of cloth that belonged to my long-lost great-aunt. Proud collected a whole basket full of stuff that he proudly dumped in front of me after 5 hours of searching. Among his treasures were 7 pieces of used chewing gum, $4.55 in loose change that had been dumped in various locations, a sweaty headband, 3 small children's left socks, a half-eaten candy bar, and a ticket to I.O. from the movie theater in the mall. Most of that will be primarily useful for DNA samples later, but this ticket was rather a particular interest to me. Really? I said, pretending interest. Yes. You see, I.O. is a science fiction movie. It's about evil aliens that are trying to take over the Earth. You don't say, I said. I briefly wondered if I could eat the candy bar and not get sick. I do. And did you know that there are no mind controllers of any kind in that movie? Shocking, I said, trying not to pay attention as I began to unwrap the candy bar. Don't you realize what this means? He raised his voice. No clue. Ah, but it is a clue. You see, the complete lack of any kind of mental influence in the movie indicates that it is a subtle camouflage for the real subliminal messages that are being used to influence these people. He pointed a finger upward, directly in front of his own face. You only found 1 ticket stub, I pointed out. Prow used his don't bother me with logic voice. I'm sure we'll find more, but the first thing we need to do is analyze that movie frame by frame to find some subliminal messages. Scene. Dawn came. A sleepy, blurry-eyed theater manager let us in and allowed Prow to begin examining each frame by hand. How Prow managed to convince Hack to convince the theater manager to do this, I will never know. I mean, I saw it. I simply do not comprehend it. Darla was still asleep back at Hack's. While Prow examined each and every single frame by hand with his magnifying glass, I took some time to read the file. It was both interesting and frightening at the same time. Apparently 90% of the customers that returned always exhibited clothing and word choices that matched a popular television show. Indeed, most of the time it was multiple television shows. All of the clothing sold at Hack's had a tiny bead in it that identified when a customer came and went. These tied in directly with sophisticated microphones hidden throughout the store, which compared what they said and analyzed it for patterns. What if simply filtering out all the people coming into the store except for those that are copying things that do on television? I asked Prow. Prow said, without looking up from his frame-by-frame analysis, an astute thought, Watson. However, I think you'll notice the details provided by the program. You would notice that Emilius Koffenheimer created it. He's one of the best programmers in the field of consumer dynamics, so I find his work will no doubt be impeccable in regards to this program. That, and when you compare the chip data to the data recorded on the voices, the numbers indicate that it is all of them, not just a significant number. Well, what if it's the chips themselves? Prow shook his head. I thought about that too, but the transmitter on these chips is rather primitive. It has an incredibly short range and basically consists of nothing but a radio reflector that identifies who the consumer is. They don't transmit in any form. I mean, think about it. It would be cost prohibitive to make it for every person in the world. No one in their right mind would do such a thing. Assuming that they are in their right stage of mind and assuming that it is, in fact, difficult to produce, I smiled. Possible, but improbable. As compared to subliminal messages in a movie. Yes. Now you're starting to see the logic of it. Such was my job. We spent the better part of the day looking through the film. He didn't find anything. Darla didn't find anything after she woke up. I didn't find anything. To be fair, I didn't find anything because I wasn't looking for anything. I absolutely refused to watch at all until the 9th time he'd gone through the film, uttering something about subconscious symbolism of aliens and our hidden interferes. It had been my hope that if I did what he wanted, then he would just give up. Sometimes he actually listened to me. This wasn't one of those times. If this were a fictional account, I would be tempted to call Prow a 2-dimensional character. In reality, he's more of an omnidirectional, 1-dimensional character. He gets something in his mind, and then pursues it as long past the area that most sane men would. He then randomly stops and moves on to something else. Somehow, I'm a vital part of this process, but I have yet to discern how it works. What I do know is that he did eventually stop sometime around 54 tries. I lost count around 31, but he was averaging 7 an hour up until that point. He was going so fast with the film, I honestly don't know how he could see anything anyway. He did so without getting upset about it. He simply stated matter-of-factly, "This is not the right path. We need to return to the shop and look for clues." The store was closed, and the gates were chained shut. At last, a chance for that much-needed sarcastic comment. "Darn it," I said. "It looks like we'll have to sleep after all." Darla smiled. "And sleep at night at that. Now that I have to sleep at night, I can sleep any time I want to, or not." "Most people can," said Prow as he looked through the gates. I could tell he really wanted to break in there, but was afraid the security guard might have an issue with that. "Actually, yes and no. Depends on how tired I am," I shared, not that anyone had asked me. "It's an act of willpower. Anyone can do it. It's like being able to make your heart stop." Prow looked at the fire alarm. "You can do that?" Darla asked weirdly. "Yes, I frequently do. I learned how with the biofeedback machine initially, but now all I need to do is my pulse. I make sure to stop it at least 3 or 4 times a day just to maintain the ability," Prow beamed. "Why?" Darla said, her voice cracking. "Well, you never know if you might be locked somewhere in an area that has a heartbeat sensor you need to get past." And for a glorious moment I thought Darla would awaken from the love spell the demon had cast on her, and see the light of day, i.e. me, but alas, such was not to be. "What if your heart gets stuck like that?" "I'm far too competent for that," he scoffed. "What if you get ambushed while it was stopped?" Darla said. "That's what my concealed handgun permit is for." Armed? Prow was armed? The world suddenly felt like a much less safer place to be in. Don't get me wrong. I'm somewhere between let's melt them all and let's have a free bazooka at school day crowd in that area, but the idea of Prow with a firearm made me distinctly uncomfortable. "What if you were ambushed while you were asleep?" Darla didn't let it go. "Why would I be stopping my heart while I'm asleep?" "What if you had a dream that you were practicing stopping your heart and got ambushed and woke up before you could get to the gun?" She looked perfectly serious and calm. He thought about it for a moment. "You have a good point. Do you have Hawk's phone number?" "Right here," she beamed, quite relieved that she had handed him a piece of paper. I couldn't help but notice he hadn't actually promised to stop stopping his heart, but she seemed to consider the matter finished. 20 minutes later, a very confused security guard led us into the store. 4 hours later, the janitorial staff awakened us all and began to clean again for the morning crowds. Prow's technique of hunting the carpet for clues hadn't helped any of us stay awake. Prow rubbed his eyes and yawned. "Curse it all, I should have taken something. Time is of the essence." "Why?" I asked. "Because after reading the file, I believe this behavior is increasing. We have to find out exactly what is causing it, or it might be irreversible." "Well, all right then. What next? I really don't know." Prow almost made me believe him. Prow said, "Perhaps the janitorial staff. This place is incredibly clean. I believe the right combination of cleaning supplies might be able to produce a mind-altering effect if it was used correctly." "Should I call OSHA?" Darla asked. He shook his head. "Not without more evidence. We need to get a chemical sample from each of the areas near the store." I hated this. Collecting samples for Prow to analyze was the worst part of the job. Once, we had analyzed over 700 wood samples before he finally became convinced that the thing disrupting the satellite dish was an ant chewing at the electrical wire like we said it was. At any rate, we slept in the plane that night, and Prow was obviously annoyed. He'd not made any progress and seemed at a loss of what to do. "Have you considered going in during the day?" I asked. "Can't," he replied. "And why not?" "Because we might be affected by whatever is affecting the others." He pointed to the file. I said, "You didn't seem to care about that while we were looking at the subliminal messages, or mind-affecting carpet fibers." Darla smiled. "He's got a point." Prow sighed. He threw up his hands and said, "Fine, we'll go." There was not much room to move inside the store. It was the middle of September, and suddenly I found it feeling like the day before Christmas. I now understood Prow's desire to avoid the scene. It was one thing to read about it in a file, but it was something else entirely to see it fresh. The people around us were all sporting brand new and very fashionable clothing. Most of it was subtle enough that I never would have noticed on my own, but there were exceptions. Everyone was wearing a Kiwi Cabana friendship bracelet, which had just been the subject of a recent Life with Smucky episode. Amusing stuff. They all seemed to be using a vernacular I barely understood, though as I listened it began to make more sense. The weirdest thing was the way they all moved the same way. It was minuscule but present, like a soft wind on a wet wheat field. The clothing consisted of basically 5 types. Normally this much variety might not stand out if you were passing the crowd, but when you studied it as much as we did, it became downright disturbing. The females either wore a white and silver or blue skirt with a gold, green, or gray blouse. The men wore either a t-shirt and jeans or a business suit. The t-shirt always contained an advertisement for Hack's department store. The suit was always black. The most disturbing thing about them was the way they talked. They used words like, "I sail so sunset never happens," or "Dance to death, baby." They used these words interchangeably with ordinary everyday objects in a way like someone else might say, "That thing over there with the thing," instead of they said, "That dance of death, baby, over there, well, with this, I'll sail so sunset never happens." We elbowed our way through the crowd and ended up near the jewelry counter. A pretty girl with black hair and piercing green eyes stood in the middle, desperately trying to help 7 or 8 people at once. She waved to Dollar and smiled. "Oh, hey, I wondered when you were going to show up." "We've been here a while, but working odd hours," Darla yelled back over the crowd. There was a tone of nervousness in her happy greeting. "Do you know each other?" Prowl asked. "Yes, actually," Darla said. Prowl pretended not to hear over the crowd. "What did you say?" "Yes, I know her. Her name is Amberlove," she said a bit louder with a tone of worry, almost shame. "Is she the reason we learned of this case?" Prowl looked accusingly at her, invading her personal space. Darla paused for about 10 seconds, the clamor of the crowd making the silence impossible. She stammered, "Yes." "And how exactly do you know her?" Prowl loomed over her. "We both met through the narcoleptic.net network. It's a support group for those who had it. She said the last part quickly in correction. Prowl was obviously angry. "You lied to me. I told you no cases that have a personal," and then he stopped him mid-sentence, a look crossing his face. "Has she had the surgery, the one you had?" Darla looked at Amberlove, who nodded. "Interesting," Prowl thought. "When exactly did she get this surgery?" "She got it around the same time I did, 5 or 6 weeks ago." "Which just happens to be the same time things started happening here," Prowl mused. "I find that not to be a coincidence." "Well, what are you suggesting?" I asked. "That somehow she developed psychic powers and is mind-controlling everyone?" "Don't be ridiculous. I believe in science, not stupidity. Even if there are such things, any phenomena thus demonstrated has been pathetically weak. No, I think this is something else." Prowl began to pace. "What?" I asked. "I don't know yet. I need to watch and do some research, but I think it would help if Amberlove took the day off." He inspected his magnifying glass. "Should I go too?" Darla asked. I think for now, yes. The best thing is for me to observe how these people behave, both with the 2 of you here and with each of you here individually, and also without either of you here at all." "Will I get paid?" Amberlove said. It was obvious that while Hack splurged on janitorial staff, he was not quite so generous with the retail side of things. "I will speak to Hack. If he doesn't, I will." She smiled at this. She had a very nice smile, but not as nice as Darla's. The next several days involved a great deal of hurried activity as Prowl tried every combination of Darla and Amberlove he could think of, but to no tangible result. He insisted that he could detect subtle behavior shifts with each combination before he finally announced a solution. "And what would that be?" I asked. "It is difficult to put into words. I think it best to make one up. Memesync should do here." Prowl wrote the word on a whiteboard. "What?" "Meme. Borderline psychological concept involving fads, ideas, or mass hysteria, passing from person to person in a self-replication fashion akin to a virus. Sync to come in tandem with, often used in conjunction with the idea of nullification." I blinked and tried to take all that in. The sync thing I get. What exactly do you mean by a meme?" He put his hand under his chin. "Thought virus, like the Macarena. It's an idea of putting a biological perspective on ideas that look at the mental plane." I asked. "You mean like Republicans are elephants and Democrats are donkeys?" "In rough equivalent, totally inadequate way, kind of." "That's a pretty vague answer," I said. "My mother raised me to be polite. As I was saying, I believe Darla and Amberlove, indeed any narcoleptic who's had this surgery, was a Memesync, only now they're not. They've become the opposite." "What, you mean like super alpha female types?" I asked. He began to pace. "In a manner of speaking, yes. They can't, I believe, influence at a conscious level. But at the mid-range of thought between conscious and the id, the dreaming mind, yes, I most definitely do." "And how exactly do we confirm this theory of yours?" I asked. He stopped pacing. "An interesting question. I think the first thing that we have to do is figure out how to get them to influence people in a subtle way." I looked at the security monitors viewing the store. Well, she works at the jewelry counter. We could give them some kind of new ring or something and have people ask to try it out. Brilliant as ever, Watson. I'll contact Hack and let him know. Darla thought the entire thing was stupid, but she respected Prow's insistence that she not tell Amberlove. Thus, when Amberlove received specific instructions from Hack to push small, cheap, and pretty ring charm, she did so with the usual stoicism. Nothing happened at first. Of course, Darla had to help out at the jewelry counter to allow Amberlove to actually work the special sale. I could tell that Amberlove thought this was weird, but the bizarre schedule Prow had set up for them on the last week made the unusual seem usual at this point, and so eventually she started relaxing and selling the rings. The more relaxed and natural she became, the more fascinated people got. The larger the crowd grew, the more people were interested in the rings. What I found particularly interesting, though, was the way people were interested in the rings in the mall after they left Amberlove. It wasn't just a case of her being super persuasive somehow. No, it was the idea of her pushing the rings that got people excited, so excited that they shared the sentiment with other people. Pretty soon we ran out of rings, but Prow was convinced, and so was Hack. You're brilliant, Mr. Prow, that's all I can say. Thank you, sir. But you do me much kindness. The fact is, now that we know, I'm a bit of a remiss of how to find a solution. Why don't we ask Darla or Amberlove, I asked, because they might influence our thoughts. Whatever they said was a good idea would probably be acceptable to us as the best idea possible. Prow seemed particularly disturbed by this idea. He was, after all, a rugged individualist. All right, maybe. On the other hand, what do you expect them to do, live in isolation the rest of their lives? I need to think about this. I also need to think more about the surgery. We don't have time, I shouted. People are getting their brains fried. This, it turns out, was a mistake. You're absolutely right. Good thinking, Watson. We need to test this out right away. Come with me. I'd been joking. It had seemed like a good idea at the time. Now my sarcasm was coming back to haunt me. Are you sure about this? I mean, what about practically dragging me with the strength I didn't know he had? He pulled me into the next room with Darla and Amberlove were waiting. Girls, Prow said, diplomatic, I have something disturbing to tell you. That we have mind control powers, Darla said. You have. How did you know? We had telepathic powers, Amberlove said, smiling. You are now our hopeless slaves. Prow said, Never! I shall fight you with my with every last ounce of... Darla mock-smacked Amberlove and smiled. We don't have telepathic anything. We heard you in the other room. Willpower and Prow blinked a moment and finally said, Then, well, I propose we test this theory. That's already done, too. Explain, Prow said curtly, his face barely contained a mask of boiled emotions. Darla said, pointing at me, Chester, look at him. What has Watson got to do with this? Prow said. I looked at myself. I seemed normal to me. Darla giggled. He's dressed like Ika Jika Jiwi from Crush Dusters 5. Prow looked me over, thought a moment, and said, Yes, I suppose he is. Now that I gave it serious thought, I suppose the long, bright red rubber trench coat with the plaid moon boots probably wasn't my usual style. And you were just noticing this now? I've been wearing this for days. It took me a while, Amberlove said. I didn't notice until Darla pointed it out. And why didn't you say anything? I cried indignantly. Well, we didn't want to ruin the experiment. I never volunteered to be experimented on, I shouted. Darla smiled. So it's okay for us, but it's not okay for you? Prow said, interrupting my clever and deadly retort. What was the result of the experiment? Know then, gentle reader, that what I would have said at the moment was, I'm not a genetic freak, so huzzah! Or perhaps, you ate what for breakfast? Needless to say, I felt like a complete tool. Amberlove rubbed my shoulder. It happens to the best of us. I wasn't so sure I agreed. Prow rambled on. I think that there's a part of us that is hardwired to respond in groups. If you've ever been in a crowd when it goes crazy, or a crowd when it starts to do the wave, there's a part of you that is almost primal that wants to join in. I think that part of us is what makes memes work on. And I think that some people are naturally good at connecting to this part of who we are. Animal magnetism, natural leaders, call it what you will. However, I think that narcoleptics are natural counter to this. Namely, I think they have, until now, kept these memes from growing out of control. So essentially what you're saying, Darla said, is that without narcoleptics, society is doomed. Think of it this way. Narcolepsy has only been medicated in the last century or so. As narcoleptics ceased to sleep, the amount of fads that caught on began to exponentially increase. That's balderdash. That's more of an increase in the sophistication of media, I replied. True to a degree. It's difficult to point out where one ends and one begins, but I don't think media alone is sufficient to account for the bizarre habits of humanity that they've taken in the name of conformity. That missing part, I believe, is taken up in narcoleptics. Indeed, I'm willing to bet that the gene for charisma is the same one that causes narcolepsy. Our most potent leaders and charismatics, in fact, have been allowing society to think for itself by sleeping. Darla and Amberlove seemed to like the idea and smiled, though Darla said, "But does that mean we can't use the surgery?" Prowl thought and then said, "Complain about side effects and the FDA will demand further testing. Indeed, while talking to them, I imagine they'll believe you. You should have the surgery reversed." "Oh, we don't need to do that," Amberlove pouted. "It's the ethical thing to do," Prowl frowned. "What she means is that it requires multiple treatments. Once we stop, our regular symptoms will reappear." Darla was obviously not happy at this idea. "You're going to stop being narcoleptic again? You're going to start being narcoleptic again because of this idiot?" I said. "To save Earth. Yes, I will," she sighed. And so she did. The FDA believed it. I almost blew the whistle on it all, but when Darla pointed out the rather draconian NDA I'd signed, I'm fairly certain that there were all kinds of laws that would protect me from that. But she had me sit on it with her super persuasiveness until I noticed that she'd started sleeping again. By then, the study had been postponed and a new kind of cure was being sought. Prowl had gotten together with several researchers to begin quietly studying memetics, idiocy. The woman I loved was being kept in chains of sleep by the ranting of a madman. The effects on those people in the store began to wind down. The store went national. Amberlove decided to stay around. She's not as pretty as Darla, but she's marginally more intelligent. She agrees with me that I should file a complaint with the FDA, but thinks I should wait until the right time. She helps Darla a lot with the secretarial stuff. Prowl put her on the payroll. The two of them giggle a lot, and Prowl has more business coming in.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright
2022!
To fight the forces of evil!
Welcome to the third installment of the secret commentary on definitely the worst of all of my 7 novels. So, not gonna lie, this is probably the best of the 3 chapters that I've done in the novel. As an independent story, it would be, because it, remember, originally was a short story, it would be, I would say, a C-. Interesting idea. Okay characters. Ironically, as a short story unto itself, there are problems simply because of the fact that, for obvious reasons, I didn't include all of the details of who is Kiessen's Prowl, who is this Darla person, and who is Chester. And while I did adjust it for the novel, from what I remember of the original short story, I didn't add that much. So, in terms of a chapter, I don't know, B-. Like I said, it's definitely the strongest of the 3 chapters so far. Amberlove is definitely my favorite of the 4 primary characters in the novel, and she gets absolutely the least screen time. I had a friend who I had read this once, and who he told me that he had never had, in the first few chapters that he read before he gave up, that he had never enjoyed hating such obnoxious characters so much. So, in other words, he was reading them purely in hopes that something happened to our 3 protagonists, and I can't blame him. Prowl is boorish and, frankly, kind of dumb, but lucky. Chester/Watson is arrogant and snarkastic and only gets worse. In fact, frankly, well, I cannot avoid the inherent problem of the author avatar character. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, an author avatar character is basically when the author puts a version of themselves into the novel. That can be as vague as a Hitchcock or Stan Lee cameo, and some author avatar characters that I put in novels have been just that minor, to the outright actual author avatar character Stephen King literally putting himself in the novel, which was incredibly well done, as weird as the Gunslinger books are, to the absolutely abomination and terrible, and when I stopped watching M. Night Shyamalan movies, where Lady in the Water makes the mysterious author, who is the savior of us all, the Messiah. I mean, seriously? But this novel was before I started my habit of basically killing author avatar characters before they come on screen. The best job I ever did of that was Liberty Curving, who is a dark version of me if I had had circumstances similar to his. And I'm so anxious to let my actual characters shine, and they do in Forever West, that I literally kill my darling in the first paragraph of the fucking novel. The villain in the first novel, Hercules Raw, is the closest to an author avatar character, and Hercules Raw isn't even human, really. He looks human, he acts human, but he is so far away from what actual human is that there's a part of me in that character, but that, not really. I didn't really run into an author avatar character. He's over the top, but he doesn't steal the plot as an author avatar character is wont to do. In the third novel, Grenade Man, Grenade Man's me, but only a part of me. And Grenade Man is insane, and the entire existence of anything that Grenade Man is in exists to prove how ridiculous the world is and how ridiculous Grenade Man is. So not as much of a problem as Chester is. Chester is the weakest, worst part of myself in a situation at a time when I was a technical writer and I was very frustrated with life and very frustrated with myself. And it shows in everything that bears about Chester. And Chester goes off the rails, frankly. As you will see as the novel progresses, Chester is not a nice person. He does get better, but Chester has problems. Now, well, I'm not going to go there. I don't even know if I'm going to go there at all. There's an interesting subtext with this novel that involves a major character that also involved who this novel was dedicated to that I am debating whether I will include at all. You'll notice that the novel did not include the dedication, and there's a reason for that. So anyway, skipping that nonsense. Well, actually, I can't really, because the first time an actual major theme actually goes somewhere, in fact, if I was to somehow try and resurrect this novel without rewriting it from scratch, i.e. I hit my head and had brain damage, I would start with this chapter and then do the first chapter as a flashback in the second chapter, heavily rewritten, and just throw the second chapter completely away. But I guess I can't truly do a commentary without providing some background. So let's start with the two big themes that I introduce in this, which are arguably the most interesting themes of the book that make it the most unique, but also are scientifically completely bullshit. The first concept that I deal with in this chapter is memes. And I was playtesting a sequel that sadly and criminally never got produced by Holistic Design, that was a prequel set in the early days of the First Republic that was just fucking fantastic. And Andrew Greenberg and Bill Bridges and Ken Leitner and everybody who worked at Holistic had such unfucking believable ideas in that playtesting that it just changed my thinking creatively majorly. And one of the concepts of this First Republic or pre-First Republic highly corporate world was that everybody had a brain implant, and that ads were not just a thing that you saw on a billboard, but they like literally psychically assaulted you. In fact, there was a class that they were making that was, again, fucking brilliant, that literally slung these advertisements as weapons against enemies and helped defend the party from ads. And sadly, the folks at Holistic never did anything with this, in part because I guess they feel that some of the very early brilliant ideas they have become dated. The more I think and the more I remember, I disagree with this, but it's not my property and not my circus, not my monkeys anymore. I'm still friends with the guys from Holistic, but I am not really affiliated with them in any way, shape, or form. But the whole concept of these ads, and explaining to me how it worked, they talked to me about memes, and I never even heard about memes. I do explain memes in the story adequately well, so I'm not going to go back about what a meme is, but I wanted to provide some context that, at the time, a lot of my short stories involved memes, and, later, there's a fascinating, fabulous monster in the role-playing game, damn it, what's the name of that thing? Monty Cook. Numenera. In a post-apocalyptic Thundar the Barbarian inspired gonzo psycho far in the future amazing game, which I also played with some of the guys in Holistic, run by a friend of mine who has done voiceover work for Iodicius and a couple of other stories that hopefully I will be able to delight you with the voiceover work of Forever West and Grenade Man. But either way, he ran this fantastic campaign, and one of the things in that was this just delightful monster called the Weaponized Meme, which went all the way back to the work on... I'm suddenly drawing a blank on the name of this First Republic Fading Suns game that's not Fading Suns. But now that Fading Suns has been sold to another company, it's highly unlikely that said game will ever be created. But you never know. Hopefully when they turned over all the intellectual property of Fading Suns, they also had to turn over their notes from this First Republic game, because I cannot emphasize enough just how fucking fantastic this thing was. But the other major theme of this chapter is narcolepsy. Darla is based on my ex-wife. Technically Darla and Amber Love are based on sides of my ex-wife, but Darla has problems. And in hindsight, had I realized some of the problems that Darla had, both my ex-wife and myself would probably have been much happier people. I'm not going to get into the details of my marriage or divorce. What I will say is that Darla is complicated. In some ways, she is an interesting person. She's definitely more interesting than Prow or Chester. But I was still a member of the Mormon Church when I wrote this thing. And, nearly 20 years later, reading this to you in the podcast, Darla kind of feels like manic pixie dream girl to me, right? She's not quite as bad as an Isaac Asimov cardboard cutout, but she does seem like a stereotype. The techno nerd, pretty girl, more competent than the men. It's been done. And it was done a lot then, too. It's definitely been done to death. Now, I'm all in favor of strong female characters. You will, again, you see strong female characters in Grenade Man vs. the Zombies and Forever West and definitely Army of Fire. And you also see a very, very strong female character in Tricia in Heir of Sunfire, which, I'll be honest, even if I read it, will also never see the light of day. There's problems with Heir of Sunfire. And if I do it for the podcast, which I probably will, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to get all of my stuff on the podcast for good or bad for posterity. But if I do Heir of Sunfire for the podcast, you'll see that it's significantly better than my first two novels. It's the sixth novel I wrote, the one I wrote for National Novel Writing Month, but you'll see that there's a reason I'm not publishing it. I will eventually probably include it in my what I'm hoping to eventually do is my magnum opus, a series of anthologies, 3 of them, called Lasers Against the Dark Lord, but I'll discuss that in some other podcast. Let's just say Grenade Man will be heavily involved in Lasers in the Dark Lord, along with the awesome characters that I created for Heir of Sunfire, and also a lot of awesome characters that I've created for the podcast, some of which you would be familiar with, including Emmett Other and Rhombus Tix and E.P. Blingemeyer. All of those characters will actually, assuming I ever write it, will be in Lasers Against the Dark Lord. And I'm assuming you would actually like those characters, because anybody that's actually listening to this Drek after the Drek of the podcast, and, I'm, 15 minutes into the commentary, I'm assuming familiar with who those characters are. All 5 of you. But my point is that, like I said, Darla has problems. Anyway, narcolepsy. So, narcolepsy is a terrible disease that is not just about sleeping. It basically means that every time somebody with narcolepsy, with cataplexy, has an intense emotion, whether they're super happy or super angry or super sad, they can literally lose control of their bodily functions. There's medication for this, but narcolepsy is a very debilitating and nasty disease. It's an autoimmune disorder that people just don't know about. And I'm totally happy to leave every element about narcolepsy in this book, because people should indeed be more aware of it. We should have more research into narcolepsy and curing it. Even if Darla isn't exactly the poster child of why you should care about people with narcolepsy. Think of Amber Love, who does, in fact, actually have a personality that's not out of a cardboard box and doesn't make you want to throw all 3 of Chester, Darla, and God, most of all, Quiescence Prowl, out a window and defenestrate them. But the point is that, and no, that does not mean I want to defenestrate my ex-wife. We don't necessarily get along, but I don't consider her an enemy, and so far as I know, she doesn't consider me an enemy. I just simply have no communication with her whatsoever. The point being that Darla, on the other hand, is a fictional character, and mine to do with as I please, and throwing her out a window seems perfectly fine. So, anyway, my point is that I was thinking a lot about narcolepsy, and I was thinking a lot about memes, And so the idea of combining the two of them seemed an interesting and relevant one. And I assure you that there is, of all the dubious pseudoscientific ideas I have in this book, there is absolutely zero science, in fact, less than zero science. Even conspiracy theorists and paranormal, believers in parascience, at least until now, who knows, maybe I'm creating a whole new conspiracy, until now, did not believe that narcoleptics secretly prevented the spread of weaponized memes to brainwash and control the population.